You may remember that I've been a fan of these plastic guys and their games since my YouTube channel began in 2012. With there having been no new content for this series released in almost a decade, why am I still here? How you doing, everyone? Well, it's been a while since I've made a video dedicated to Skylanders. My last one was 3 years ago for the 10th anniversary of the Giants reveal where I drew T-Rex. Afterwards, though, I drew a few more of the Giants, being Hothead, Bouncer, and Swarm. Then I stopped drawing Skylanders for over a year before picking it up again with a 90s anime-styled Roller Brawl, who was the first female Skylander I drew, the first one from Swap Force, and the first one originating from the other studio, Vicarious Visions. Since then, I've been drawing Skylanders somewhat more frequently again, though just the actual Skylanders themselves, none of the villains or NPCs, at least not yet, and it's become somewhat of a theme for my art pages now. So, I got into Skylanders around the same time most people familiar with the franchise did, around 2012 when it was one of, if not the biggest thing in video games and toys. Being that I already loved collecting toys before that, having collected various toy sets when I was younger, to name some, animatronics, Thai beanies, Disney cars, Beyblades, etc. I wasn't really a hardcore gamer at that point. I played mostly Mario games, one Sonic game. I also enjoyed Pokemon, but I was also the right audience for the Wii and DS, a casual gamer. I wasn't a 7-year-old playing Call of Duty or some other FPS on an Xbox 360. No, I just liked playing games that were bright and colorful, though not nearly as much before this point. Of course, I had seen all the Spyro's Adventure commercials on TV at that point, but what's the most effective way of promoting toys? Note, this is what applied back in the early 2010s. I don't even think today's kids play with toys the same way we did at their age. Actually bringing the things to school for show and tell. When my fellow classmates brought their Skylanders to school and I saw them, I was like, wow, these are really cool, could I get some? I think most people saw Skylanders as a game first that happened to use toys. At that time, though, I'd seen the opposite. To me, they were cool toys first to me that happened to work in a game. Now, being a Nintendo kid who played almost exclusively Mario, I had never even heard of Spyro by himself at that point. I know Skylanders was built around him, but to me, seeing Spyro's adventure in the ads made me think, whose adventure? But that's enough on that whole thing. I got the Skylanders starter pack, fell in love with the game, and I would constantly keep taking the figure on and off the portal just to see it pop up. It really felt that the Skylanders were truly from another world, frozen in ours, and I was sending them back to their home to save it from chaos. This wasn't the first game series I was obsessed over. I had obsessed over Mario, Sonic, to a lesser extent, and Pokemon prior to this. But why did it remain with me, even after a lot of the people around me who were into it moved on? The peak of when my classmates played Skylanders was when I was in 4th grade, during the Giants era. A lot of us were excited for Swap Force, which was soon to come out around the end of that year, me included. However, skip to the fall of 5th grade, still a few people were talking about Swap Force in school, but it was a bit smaller than it was in 4th grade in Giants. The swapping mechanic of the figures looked so cool. The game having all these changes like the HD graphics were cool to me, but I was way more excited to get my hands on the new Swap Force figures. How you could tear the Skylanders apart, put them back together on different pieces or back in their original forms, that was their coolest gimmick yet. And after hearing that they were magnetic, I thought that was incredible and I really wanted to try it hands-on. I constantly asked Siri on my iPhone 5 every day how many days until October 13, 2013, which was the day Swap Force released here in America. Oh, my parents and older sister got sick of it, but that was the first time I was ever extremely hyped for a new game. Cut to Swap Force's launch week, and oh boy, this was a special one for me. Swap Force, even if it's a controversial game in the Skylanders community because I'll admit its levels are too long, will forever hold a special place in my heart because it was the first video game I had ever gotten on launch day. I got the Wii version, which, yeah, it's the worst one, and encouraged me to upgrade to an Xbox One later on, but it was the game I was the most excited for. When I arrived back at school, I asked the kid who was the first one to bring his collection to school the year prior if he got Swap Force yet. He followed me up with, "Oh, I don't play Skylanders anymore," which made me a bit disappointed, but I still had a lot of peers who were playing Swap Force, and some were even jealous that I already had it before them. Most people get the starter packs for Christmas. Later on though, going into 2014, Swap Force was not nearly talked as much over here, though it was still a point of conversation between us, probably because some of them had moved on to the other Toys to Life game that came out around the time, Disney Infinity, which I have barely played. I do remember April of that year when Trap Team got revealed. We all thought it was the coolest thing ever. Cut to the end of 5th grade and the fall that was at the beginning of 6th grade, and it was the same story as last year. Pre-ordered Trap Team, this time for the Xbox One, and it was another Skylanders game that I got at launch. This time, the amount of peers playing it was way down compared to Swap Force, but there was still a sizable community at my school. Fun fact, on my 6th grade bus, we had started a small little smuggling ring where people would bring in Skylanders and we would trade them around. That's how I got myself a Firecrack in. Only $3, which was way cheaper compared to the $16 they were selling the swappers for. However, it's 6th grade, and while that's not the start of middle school for me, that would be 7th grade right after, it's when more and more kids start to pick on you for liking childish things, and that's sort of what happened. "Oh, you still like Skylanders? What a loser." There was still a community at school, so I didn't completely start hiding it yet, but I wasn't as open about it as before for that reason. Worth mentioning that while I was still strongly interested in 6th and 7th grade, it did start fading out a bit because I started to get into anime at the same time, and that was starting to become a priority for me. 7th grade. I had moved up to middle school, and yeah, not many cared for Superchargers, though I did still want it, mainly because I thought Spitfire was so cool, and he was the Skylander who inspired my flagship OC. Yes, that's right, without Spitfire, I wouldn't have created Quest of Bluefire and by extension Eventia, and I got it that fall, just not on launch day this time. I still collected the figures a lot at this time, mostly because the actual game was the best story in the series yet, and I was hooked. However, only one other person in my group ended up getting the game this time around. Notably, this was when Skylanders was starting to struggle financially, it was going downhill, but it wasn't the end quite yet. And then in 8th grade, the final Skylanders game came out, Imaginators. This one seemed like it had the coolest figures yet. There was a Chaos figure, the senseis looked great, and a lot of the Trap Team villains finally became playable Skylanders. I got the game on launch day, getting a free Chaos figure for pre-ordering, and even getting a few more things other than the starter pack, but in my group, I was literally the only one who still cared at that time. Everyone else had already moved on to other games. I was the only one into Imaginators. As some of you may know, Imaginators is not very well liked in the community, and yeah, I'll admit, I don't like the game that much. I would go on to say, yeah, that's the worst Skylanders game ever. I literally only got like 3 more senseis for Imaginators, one of whom being Wildstorm, who's a very rare and expensive one nowadays, before I moved on to different interests like different games and anime. Not long afterward, I got a Nintendo Switch, my Fortnite obsession started, and that was basically the final nail in the coffin. In 2018, I packed all my Skylanders except for Spitfire away into storage, never to be seen again. Or would they? A few years afterward, COVID hit, the world shut down, and we were all stuck at home. In the years between 8th grade, when I lost interest, and my junior year of high school, you know things were not always the best. I was picked on by other kids at school, and with the stress of worrying about colleges and trying to look cool, yeah, I was stressed out a lot. But if there's one thing that being locked up caused me to do, it was to dig up all those Skylanders, and since I didn't have a Wii anymore, I was able to set up Dolphin Emulator, get my portal working, and for the first time in years, I was able to play Spyro's Adventure and Giants once more. I had missed the biggest game of my childhood. I was happy to play it again. In fact, shortly afterward, I even bought more characters I always wanted but never got. But also at that point, I had started obsessing with art even more. I had OCs at the time, but also several fandoms at that point that I was drawing fan art of, mostly anime and cartoons. To name some, One Piece, Dragon Ball, Powerpuff Girls, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Penny Stalking, Naruto. All of these things I had drawn, but they really didn't get as much attention, probably because there's so much fan art of them being drawn already. But then, I was thinking of what other things I could draw, and I look across my room to my shelf where the Skylanders had returned. After revisiting the games and having a new taste in favorite Skylanders, I picked Voodoo as the first of my new Skylanders to draw, and I just had so much fun drawing them, I just kept drawing Skylanders one after another. These were characters that I knew very well since not only had I bought a lot of the toys, I had also played their games so much and read their lore. So that was a long description of my history, but why do I still enjoy it? Well, being neurodivergent, I've always had a history of collecting things, and Skylanders were no exception. In spite of how expensive these games are, I simply don't mind that for the most part, with some exceptions, because they're fun, bright, and colorful, and I still enjoy owning and handling the plastic things. Even when I'm not playing the game, I will sometimes grab a swapper figure so I can fidget with it, pull it apart, and feel the magnetic click when the parts join together. A few years ago when I started collecting them again, I bought almost all the ones I always wanted as a kid but never got, except for most senseis. Respectfully, I'm never paying $500 for a Robo or a Chompy Mage, and even though I've done it a million times at this point, dropping a Skylander on the portal and seeing it come to life in-game feels like I'm casting some black magic to bring this mythical, frozen creature back to life to defend its world from the forces of evil. Compared to other games I've played since then, yes, Skylanders is smaller in scope. It's no Zelda Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring, for examples of bigger games to compare it to. You can't control the camera, you couldn't even jump in the first two games so they could make it more accessible for kids to play. The story for each game is basically, Chaos attacks the Skylands, we need to beat him up and stop him, rinse and repeat, minus superchargers for the most part. There's largely nothing that deep. What you see is what you get. Most of them follow the similar formula where you spam cool attacks and have fun beating up bad guys. As much as I love Skylanders, it's a game series for kids that's meant to largely be plain dumb fun and sell some really cool toys. Respectfully, I personally would never nominate any Skylanders game for Game of the Year, unless they made a new one that's truly worthy, but that probably won't be happening anytime soon. And of course, the main reason a lot of fans return to the franchise years later is nostalgia for these games and toys. Whenever I play any Skylanders game, mainly the first four, I get reminded of a time when everything was okay in life. I didn't have big responsibilities to worry about, I didn't have as many stresses, I didn't have as much drama in my life. To me, the most important thing to me back then was sending the Skylanders back home so that I, a Portal Master, could help them save Skylands. To this day, even though I'm now an adult and have consumed more mature media since then, it still feels otherworldly to me, even though I know how the NFC tech and the figures in Portal work. Tech like that is everywhere now, with all major phones having it built in, credit and debit cards using tap to pay, most building keys using it, to name a few. But at the time, the tech wasn't as widespread as it is now, so it truly felt magical. Another reason I appreciate these games still is the sheer creativity and passion these developers put into the games, whether it be Toys for Bob or Vicarious Visions. Seeing how much thought and care they put into the figure and character design, and I even see how the game designers are basically a bunch of nerds and I love them for it. Take some of the movesets in the Skylanders for example. Quite a few of them are confirmed to have been inspired by Naruto characters. To name a few, Stealth Elf, Swarm, Nightlight, they all take inspiration from different elements of Naruto, which is one of my favorite anime series of all time, as you know. And yeah, I don't like Imaginators very much, but as a Dragon Ball fan, that Super Saiyan Chaos final boss was really cool. Seeing what the developers were inspired by when they design a character or a story element is just really fascinating to me. The Skylanders fandom, despite not having received any new content in a very long time, apart from some U2's figures, which as of the making of this video will be out a few months after, is still surprisingly active, and this franchise, no matter how dead it is, it still brings people together to this day. I've met some great people, made some great friends who I've bonded with because they were Skylanders fans, and this was long after the series had been retired. And of course, the biggest reason is that it was one of my influences to start drawing. I know, my art style is very different from the Skylanders style. It's mostly cartoony, but I draw very anime-like. It's true, nowadays I take way more inspiration from Japanese and Eastern anime and manga than American cartoons for the most part. But before I really got obsessed with anime and drawing it all came back to Skylanders, where I would constantly draw the characters when I wasn't playing the game, because I had the best reference for the character anyone could ever have. A 360-degree turnaround using the character figure. Nowadays, I draw Skylanders as if they are in mostly 90s anime, Sailor Moon most notably. Not only do I decide to draw them in 90s anime because I like the aesthetic, but it also fits because Skylanders are now old and retro, which, honestly, it feels kinda weird to say that considering I was there for their rise to fame and fade to obscurity. There are even a few drawings I've done that have combined them with different anime that I enjoy. Dragon Ball, One Piece, Naruto, Attack on Titan, Powerpuff Girls Z, and Yu-Gi-Oh! To name some. It was even the biggest inspiration for some of my stories and fictional universes, as I've mentioned earlier. My shows, Quest of Blue Fire and its successor Eventia, were both influenced by Skylanders, both of them taking place in a dimension far away from Earth, full of floating islands, following a colorful group of characters with superpowers battling powerful villains. While the Skylanders influence was much more prevalent in Blue Fire than it was in Eventia, with Eventia taking more influence from shonen anime, it certainly is still present nowadays. As I've stated earlier, the lead heroes of both shows were inspired by Spitfire heavily, even sharing some of the same attacks and his attitude. There's a reason I emphasized him being Blue Fire in the original series, and it was because of Spitfire. Now, say what you will about the franchise, it as a whole has some valid criticisms. People aren't a huge fan of how Spyro was treated in this game, which I'll admit, as someone who grew up on the Skylanders version, I do like the reignited version of him better. Most people probably didn't like how expensive it was to 100% the game and own all the characters. People may not be a fan of the gameplay style and how it is lacking compared to other franchises. All in all, though, even if my interest in it is an on and off thing, Skylanders has left its mark on me, and it will forever be one of the most important game series to me, even if I've played many games that are, to be frank, bigger and better. But nothing will ever take away the joy I had as a kid having all those toys and seeing them come to life. If you were a Skylanders fan and still love this series years later just as I do, feel free to comment down below sharing some of your memories with this series and who your favorite Skylander is. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed hearing about why I love these games so much and how they've impacted me over the years. And if you want to see more art content in the future, like and subscribe. I also, as I mentioned earlier, have a series called Eventia that if you're a fan of high fantasy and anime, check that out as well. But in the meantime, you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later!